Welcome to another edition of GVN's Talking Comics Interview. On today's show, we have the pleasure of speaking to talented creator and philanthropist Edgardo Miranda-Rodriguez. Edgardo is working with Zoop on a campaign for the Borinqueña Volume 1 Omnibus, a hardcover collection of the graphic novels he created starting in 2016 that includes some bonus features. Today, we are going to talk to Edgardo about his creative history, his cause, and of course the new Zoop campaign. Now here's your host, Martin Sexton.
Welcome to another edition of GVN's Talking Comics. I am your host, Martin, and today we have the pleasure of speaking to not only a talented creator, but a man who has put his talents to work by promoting and cultivating the culture and history of Puerto Rico and its people, Edgardo Miranda-Rodriguez. Soon, Edgardo is continuing his work with the Zoop campaign for the Borinqueña Volume 1 Omnibus, a collection of graphic novels he created started in 2016, along with some added bonus features. Today, we're going to talk to Edgardo about his creative history, his cause, and of course, his new Zoop campaign. So let's welcome Edgardo Miranda-Rodriguez to GVN's Talking Comics. Thanks for joining us today, Edgardo. How are we doing today?
Doing well, Martin. I've had 2 cups of coffee, so I am hyped.
Well, all right. I had one. That's all I can swing. But of course, my coffee's more like chocolate with a coffee chaser. So that's how that works. Okay. So since this is the first time I've had an opportunity to talk to you, and because you've accomplished so much, I want to get a little bit into your creative background. So when did you take an interest in graphic design and comics, for that matter? And whose work motivated you to pursue that avenue of creation?
I've been a graphic designer for 30 years. Professionally speaking, I actually started my design studio just over 20 years ago. The design studio is Somos Salte. I have clients like Marvel, Sony Entertainment, Atlantic Records, and institutions like Columbia University and various nonprofits and schools throughout New York City. I evolved into the space of graphic novel production and even working with comic book art, sequential art, about 16 years ago, via one of my clients, the Caribbean Cultural Center, when I started curating art exhibitions. This actually gave me the opportunity to work directly with creators, with artists, with collectors, so that I could not only curate, but also design. As a graphic designer, I would literally take thumbnails for these many pieces that would be part of this final exhibition, design it using part of the Adobe suite, Adobe Illustrator or Adobe Photoshop, working to scale with the walls. And one of the approaches to my design for these exhibitions was embracing the reality that original sequential artwork is black and white. And many people who come to see sequential art, if you're not an avid collector, you're not always aware of that. Many people associate comic book art as full color artwork with dialogue bubbles. The reality is dialogue bubbles and color are applied digitally. Typically, original art is done by hand with pencils and inks, right? And so the exhibition, kind of like to add to the full color experience of a comic book, I applied murals to the walls. So these exhibitions included art from Gene Colan, Sean Martinbrough, Dennis Calero, Koi Pham, John Romita Jr., and then I did a full exhibition for Joe Posada. It was actually his first solo art show, and that was based on his run, the limited series, Daredevil Father, where he did his first and Marvel's first all-Latin superhero team, the Sanitarians. So these exhibitions kind of like created a blueprint for me for creating art that applied my background in graphic design and also my love for sequential storytelling. Honestly speaking, it was unprecedented for me. I really didn't see anyone that gave me direct inspiration. I didn't visit exhibitions either at private galleries or museums that left me with this indelible impression, like, I want to emulate that. I want my shows to resonate. Like, honestly, in the space of sequential comic book art, there really isn't a space that celebrates the artist. This is a commercial art form. It's produced on a deadline-driven system, and the art finds itself mostly in the hands of agents that can get it to the hands of collectors. And those collectors, unless they speak to one another, a mainstream audience doesn't even know that they exist, because many of them keep their collections and knowledge of their collections private. And I was able to kind of like broker relationships with many collectors and agents, from Nick Petratis to Albert Moy, engaging them in a level of trust. And since I had a viable and legitimate studio, well, I had my own insurance policy, and I worked with galleries and institutions that also had insurance policies. And this was always a big thing for collectors and agents. It's like, is the artwork going to be insured?
Right.
Will it be produced by someone who understands what Mylar is, what archival glass is, what climate control is for space? And I understood all of this. And therefore, I kind of like created a bar for this, and it was covered extensively by the New York Times, because no one had ever put together exhibitions like that. Nowadays it's so common. And a colleague of mine, Patrick Reed, curated an exhibition that's touring nationally for Marvel, which is an exhibition focused on Spider-Man. And this has been literally, I think it opened at San Diego's first official opening of their Comic-Con museum, and now it's presently at Kansas City. What I was doing back in 2007 and in 2009, respectively, had never been done before. And that honestly created for me, on my own terms, and my entry point into the professional world of comic book storytelling and production, because I created a space that legitimized me as a professional, but in a way that was completely unique. They, prior to me, was not this kind of like scene or even community of curators, only agents and collectors. And this was a space that really validated the artists, the collectors, the agents, in a way that truly spoke to this love of this art form that had never been done before. One collector literally gave us permission to exhibit unseen art by Billy Graham. And if you're not familiar with Billy Graham, he was one of, if not the first African American to draw for Marvel. Of an artist who was part of this kind of like 70s Harlem Renaissance, and himself was a Renaissance man, because not only did he illustrate Luke Cage, but aside from his work in Marvel, he was very well known in the theater community in New York City as a performer and as an active participant in this scene. These exhibitions gave us access to art that was pretty much hidden in the collection of many artists. And to this day, I have a great relationship with collector Nick Petratis, who is an avid collector of everything from John Cassaday to Sal Buscema to Billy Graham.
And so these are exhibitions. These weren't like things for sale. They were just things for people to view, correct?
Correct. Because they were hosted at the Caribbean Cultural Center, at gallery exhibition spaces, so not necessarily private galleries. And when you create these exhibitions in the space of educational purpose and cultural purposes, there isn't this looming pressure of selling. Right. In the private gallery world, these exhibitions typically would last about a few weeks. And quite honestly, I'm not too well aware, but to my knowledge, there might not be an actual scene of private galleries. I'm acquainted with Vincent Zerzullo of Metropolis Collectibles. To my knowledge, he's one, if not the only, private agencies that represent artists and collections that actually also has a gallery space in New York City. Typically, this kind of gallery space for art is relegated to the fine art world. And, the fine art community, well, they don't actually look at sequential art as art like we do.
Right. And that actually was a thing way, that's probably why most of my comic books got thrown away by my sister, who didn't think it was anything but trash. And of course, this was just the comic books themselves, not the original art. Okay, so let's go back a little bit. When you came out of high school, you got a scholarship to Colgate. And it was there that you started kind of to embrace social activism. Was it, in those early days, what inspired your passion to try to make a difference, even in your early college days?
Honestly, it was reading comics. I grew up reading comic books. It was something that was always speaking to me in a way that no other art form, no other literature spoke to me. these are narratives that have always embraced social justice. These are narratives and protagonists that have always faced insurmountable odds, as the cliche would say, right? And I literally have this image of Spider-Man pushing debris that is covering him that was drawn by Steve Ditko. This kind of iconic image that was actually recreated in a few of the live action films, right? This kind of like metaphoric image was kind of like something that was always connected to the storyline. So if I marched on the streets for social justice issues, immediately after, I would go to the comic shop and pick up some comics that really validated it. I had recently had a great conversation with one of my heroes, Chris Claremont, about this, and he really validated this for me because he spoke to the reality that he really didn't feel that there could be a disconnect between these stories, these characters, and the real world around them, the atrocities of injustices, of bigotry, of ailments, of society ills that are affecting the disenfranchised, the underprivileged. And although much of his storytelling was centered around narratives that were metaphoric, you know, and for example, the legacy virus, obviously to me that was the AIDS virus. The anti-mutant movement, well, that could be anything from anti-trans, anti-gay, anti-black, anti-et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, fill in the blank, right? So these stories kind of like validated me. And I grew up in marginalized communities in New York City. I grew up a part of a poor family, not even working class. We were poor. By the age of 18, I lived in 22 different places. I survived arson. Many of the homes that I lived in New York City were victim to this kind of a easy out that corrupt landlords had to kind of claim insurance because they didn't want to have black and brown tenants in their tenements. And so this was part of my experience. And as a precocious child who was always on the honor roll, I was always well aware of the inequities. I was always well aware that things just didn't add up. And as a young man, this always resonated. I recall as a high school student when I lived in Syracuse, New York, as an independent study, I decided to do research and write papers on apartheid in South Africa. And I learned about Nelson Mandela, and I learned how the arts in that time really helped to amplify the struggle of South Africans through Little Stevie's organization of this collective of musicians called Artists United Against Sun City. And then you had charitable efforts like Bab Geldof, who raised money for families that were starving in Ethiopia. I saw the connection that art had to not only raise awareness, but to truly spark philanthropic work. And that's kind of what kind of like has led me to my own very unique approach to graphic novel production and comic book storytelling. That to me, organically, it connects to real issues. And it, at my age, I feel that I can be more impactful if my activism is directly linked to philanthropic work.
Excellent. Okay, now you had mentioned a little earlier about the work that you had done with Joe Posada. How did that meeting come across?
I used to love reading Wizard magazine. That to me was like what Adweek was for ad agencies, what Rolling Stone or Billboard is to the music industry. But as a fan, even though I wasn't actually producing comic books, you know, Wizard magazine at that time was the only periodical that really had a comprehensive look on everything from collecting to reading to reporting. And they were reporting on this project that Joe Quesada was developing. He was about to write and illustrate his own miniseries, Daredevil Father. And I was on the train, literally on my way up to meet with my clients at the Caribbean Cultural Center, who at the time had a gallery space in Columbus Circle. And as I would in many other days, I would always have my copy of Wizard or any other graphic novels or comic books on me, and I'd read them on the train ride from Brooklyn to Manhattan. And there it was. And it just so happens that Dr. Marta Moreno Vega, who is the founder and president, well, former president of the Caribbean Cultural Center, and a professor at NYU, is also an ordained and practicing Yoruba priestess. Yoruba is referring to the West African religions, which carried across the Atlantic Ocean, have been interpreted by various Caribbean islands as either Santeria or Voodoo or Spiritismo, and the various names. Um, Joe, I had been connected with because I was also a freelance journalist. And I had interviewed Joe Quesada and I had interviewed Axel Alonso. So, and at the time, this is what many people may not understand, that pre-Disney, you could literally go to the masthead of Marvel Comics and literally call that 212 New York City number and literally be patched directly to anyone you asked for, because there was no corporate structure that existed. As Axel Alonso said it himself, this was literally a mom and pop shop that they ran. So I was working as a freelance writer and wrote, literally called Marvel. Yeah, I'd like to speak to Joe Quesada. Hold on, please. That easy.
That does not happen now.
No, sir. And I pitched the idea and the story to him, and he invited me in to his office. And so at that point, I had a pre-established connection relationship with him. So when I saw this write-up about his project, I asked my client and mentor, Dr. Marta Manolo Vega, hey, this guy's working on a comic book series about Santeria. I think we should check this out to kind of see that. And quite honestly, we wanted to make sure that he was doing something authentic, and it wasn't going to be something exploitational or God forbid, something that would be an incredibly negative portrayal of this religion. And it turned out to be quite the opposite. Joe welcomed us in. We had a meeting, the three of us, at his offices, and he actually saw this meeting as an opportunity, because he still had not completed the script for Daredevil Father. He shared with us that and at the time, many people may not know this, but what truly inspired him to write Daredevil Father was the recent loss of his father. At this point, Joe was an orphan. I mean, he's an adult, but he was an orphan. He had lost his mother and his father. Shared with us that his mother was a practitioner of Santeria, that as a child growing up in Queens, she would take him to the beach, and she would sing to him songs about Yemaya, who is the deity, dedicated to the seas. And this always stayed with him. And this project, Daredevil Father, was an homage, an homenaje to his parents. And so he asked Dr. Marta Manolo Vega if she could provide him some guidance, because one of the characters that he created, all of the characters that he created were based on the Orishas, the different deities of Santeria. But he wanted an authentic prayer to kind of connect to the story of one of his characters, El Egua. And Dr. Marta Manolo Vega provided that for him. He was so grateful, and this conversation was just happening so organically. I saw an opportunity. At that point, I had curated exhibitions, but nothing in comics. So I just looked at this as an opportunity. And I said, hey, Joe, what if we did an art exhibition about this project? He was like, what? I've never had a solo art show. And Marta immediately loved the idea. She gave us the budget. Marvel gave us complete access and permission to use art and imagery. Joe literally opened up his collection at the time. His agent, Spencer Beck, had most of his original art. And that would also be my introduction to this world of comic book collecting art, sequential art agents. And we did a completely comprehensive exhibition on his work from that series. So that was actually kind of like how that started. And to this day, I literally still have Joe's cell number. Every time of the year, I text him a happy birthday or a happy Father's Day, and I'm very fortunate that through the course of my career, I've been connected to so many incredibly talented and successful creators who I still have, to an extent, a level of access to.
And it's also, again, as many times I've heard, it's the lesson of you don't know what can be done unless you ask. I mean, you could have been intimidated and say, okay, I'm not, I'd like to do this, but I'm not going to ask Joe about this. But you went for it, and it came to pass. So
Martin, my philosophy, and my wife will tell you this, it's literally like my mantra. It's very simple. Let them say no. That's it. Let them say no. Just we had a meeting this morning about some ideas that I had that I was going to pitch. And she, she gave her insightful commentary that, and she's very grounded, and she was sharing that, I don't know if this is really going to go anywhere, but you know what? Like you always say, let them say no. And a lot of times these projects and these opportunities happen because somebody on the other side of that question or request, they just go, yeah, why not?
Yeah,
And
I
then
say,
it just happens.
I say, and it's what I learned. Like I said, I've been with Geek Vibes now for almost 5 years, and of course, I'm over 60, so I started late. I was intimidated to ask anybody for anything, and that's what my editor in chief said. Oh, it's the worst I could tell you is no. I said,
Yeah.
and it's not like it's going to leave a wound. You're going to be fine.
Yeah, I always
And
tell my sons, no one's gonna stand on their chair or stand on a desk and go, no. That's only in cartoons that happens. They'll just go, nah, I don't think so. That's
yeah,
it. That's
and
wonderful.
more often than not, they say yes. So it's
Yeah.
all good. Okay, so let's get into the main reason that I'm talking with you today, which is, of course, your partnership with the good folks at Zoop for the Borinqueña Volume 1 Omnibus. For people who are not familiar with the character, could you give us sort of a background of what the character is about and her powers and pretty much what her story is about?
So La Borinqueña is an original character that I created in 2016 when I started self-publishing this series through my studio, Somos Salte. Her alter ego, Marisol Rios de la Luz, is a Puerto Rican college student who lives here in Brooklyn. And to study abroad, she moves to Puerto Rico to live with her grandparents. She also is really there to kind of like look out for them as well, because they're retired. But like most families with older members, retirement is just kind of like a phrase or transition to another job or another project. And they're running a cafe. So she ends up running this cafe with them. While she's in Puerto Rico, she continues her undergraduate studies as an independent studies student because the university system, reflecting the reality, is suffering a lot of incredible budget cuts, millions of dollars in budget cuts. So, as a visiting student, well, she's not a priority for the University of Puerto Rico. Their priority are actually to their full matriculated students, not visiting students, particularly one who's coming from New York City from an Ivy League school. So she sets up an independent studies to explore caves in Puerto Rico. Upon discovering these various caves, she finds these ancient crystals. These crystals, when they come together, form a star, opening a portal which connects her to the goddess of Puerto Rico. The indigenous people of Puerto Rico were the Taínos, the original name of Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is actually Spanish for rich port, a name that was given by the Spaniards, which colonized Puerto Rico. The Taínos, the indigenous people of Puerto Rico, and also the Greater Antilles Islands, refer to Puerto Rico as Borinquen. That's actually where Borinqueña comes from, because the national anthem is a variation of the word Borinquen, La Borinqueña, or the Puerto Rican woman. This mother goddess, Atabex, connects Marisol to other deities. In Taino language, those are referred to as the semis. The semis represent elemental forces in for the Tainos, elemental forces that are connected to hurricanes, the seas, that are connected to land and earth. And so these semis imbue La Borinqueña with superpowers. The ability to flight comes from her manipulation of weather. The superhuman strength comes from the seas and the mountains. She can actually manipulate the earth. And the portals that she opens with her stars don't necessarily serve as an opportunity for her to travel to other dimensions necessarily, but allows her to communicate with the goddesses and gods of the Tainos of Puerto Rico. It also works as a form of as a storytelling device for me because I've written that it allows her to see the past. She doesn't travel to the past. She doesn't engage with anything, so she can't change anything. But it's kind of like wearing VR goggles. She could see stuff, but she's not actually participating in this. And it gives me as a writer an opportunity to connect readers to historical moments that honestly don't have any actual visual connections to. So as a storyteller, I take liberties with this and kind of like interpret history through, kind of a historical fiction. So I refer to this style of writing that I've been doing for the last 7 years as uh, historical, speculative historical fiction, right? It's kind of like a mixture of sci-fi and historical fiction and superhero storytelling. And those of us who love and understand and have been reading superhero comics for decades really know that at its core, it's sci-fi.
Right. So now, around the same time when you did your first issue, you had did a book with Marvel and with Daryl McDaniels for Guardians of the Infinity that included a character named Abuela Estella that you created. Did that character or the fans' reaction to that character influence any in your creation of the Borinqueña?
Actually, it did. I'm glad that you caught that. Not many people make that connection. You see, the response immediately of that story, particularly of that character, who quite honestly was created again as a storytelling device. She was able to be that character that was able to, well, allow more exposition on this theory, this idea that there may be another origin for Groot, right? We all who follow comics well may know that Groot comes from Planet X, and he's part of a larger species of extraterrestrial tree-like creatures. Um, the theory that I kind of incorporated and is actually now part of Marvel canon is that, well, perhaps he's also connected to these ancient trees that have been in Puerto Rico for centuries, the ceiba, which is actually a tree that's also prominent throughout Latin America and West Africa. But this character of Abuela Estela was literally the voice who provided that to the story because there wouldn't really be a context. And then I literally added my older son into the Marvel universe. So she has a conversation with her grandson, Kian. And in this conversation, it's just literally just 2 or 3 panels where she has this conversation with him. But that was enough to be picked up by media outlets here across the United States and in Puerto Rico. And before I knew it, I was being celebrated and recognized as a Marvel writer, as as if I were some prolific creator that's been connected to this publishing company for some time. And I immediately was kind of like taken aback because I just wrote a short story for an anthology series, and there was no ongoing series. I didn't have a a long-standing relationship with Marvel as a writer. I did as a curator and an art exhibition designer. So this was an opportunity I saw that I really had to take. And so the idea of La Borinqueña existed, but never really had an outlet, or more so, never really had a launch pad. And I saw this as this is the launch pad. This is the opportunity. So I was able to take the buzz that was generated from this one story that I wrote for Marvel, and I was able to kind of like pivot that and redirect it towards the launch of La Borinqueña, which honestly has been much more impactful in my career and in terms of in the space of storytelling and philanthropy beyond whatever I would have done with Marvel at the time. Basically because this is my intellectual property. This and well, that's a lot. Well, many people may not understand. When you own your intellectual property, you can decide which direction the project takes. There's no editorial team or board of directors that you have to cater to. I can decide what kind of partnerships, collaborations, licensing, events, etc. I can actually align myself with. I could also decide what issues or causes this project has to align myself. For the brief time that I worked with Marvel, everything had to run by them, whether it was interviews, whether it was appearances, whether it was anything to do with their characters, anything and everything had to run by them. This is not excluding Comic Cons. Comic Cons kind of like exist in this very unique space where artists are allowed to kind of like exhibit and sell pinups of characters they don't own. But outside of that space, there are limitations to what you can do. It's kind of like this little box that you kind of like pushed into, and you have to respect that. These are not your character. You may add your flavor to this character for a brief time, but at the end of the day, there's a history, and there will be other creators soon after you that will continue to add to the canon of these many characters.
They say, and it's funny you said that because at a Comic-Con a few years back, Neil Adams was talking about Batman. He said that you can do whatever you want with Batman, but you have to put him back the way you found him because he's not yours.
Yeah,
and that's pretty much how that works.
I like that. That's true. I love that last part. You got to put him back where you found him because he's not yours. Spoken like a true spoken like the true patriarch of comics that he was. May he rest
Yes,
in peace.
yes, very much so. Okay, so for the project, you have a number of talented artists. You got Angel Jesus Colon doing a new cover for you. Will Rosado, who I think worked on the original book. Christopher Sotomayor is also involved. So how did those collaborations come about as far as your artists go? And do you have any other contributors for your campaign that are also doing something for you?
We do have some things that we're working on. We haven't been able to formally announce it yet because we just haven't received the physical art. So I don't want to like say, artist X is contributing this, and then artist X doesn't fulfill their deadline in time. So what we've been able to do with this project, I liken it to what and obviously in the fictional space, what Professor Xavier has done with Cerebral, or actually let's say it in Spanish because it's actually a Spanish word, cerebro, which is Spanish for brain, right? Is that when this project was first announced in 2016, many other Puerto Rican artists in the industry started connecting and reaching out to me, because at no point in the history of comics here in the United States have there ever been a project that addressed or celebrated or directly spoke to the Puerto Rican experience here in the United States. And for those that don't know, for over a century, Puerto Rico has been a colony in the United States. Puerto Riqueños, and we're not just talking about Puerto Ricans like myself who live here in the United States. We're talking about Puerto Riqueños in the Caribbean. Those 3 million that are there, they're U.S. citizens. Little spoiler, if you watch Spider-Verse, there's one takeaway line that Philip Lord wrote that Luna Velez performed as the character of Rio Morales, where she says, she literally goes, Puerto Rico is part of America. We're not immigrants. So when this project kind of was announced, and it was announced in a big way, it was covered immediately by Washington Post, NBC News, CNN, and we didn't even have a book. Many artists started reaching out to me because they wanted to connect to this project. Artists like Gus Vasquez, the two that you mentioned, Chris Sotomayor, Will Rosado, Rags Morales, Chris Batista, Felix Serrano, George Perez, Tony Daniel. Goodness, so many Puerto Rican artists. Emilio Lopez wanted to be a part in either a large way or a small way to this project. And many of them shared with me they never in their career worked alongside other Puerto Ricans or worked with a Puerto Rican character. And, like, may he rest in peace, George Perez once shared with me that when he was drawing Wonder Woman, he visualized a Puerto Rican woman. That's why her hair was so curly and wavy. When he was drawing Starfire, he was envisioning Puerto Rican bombshell Iris Chacon, who was kind of like this icon in the 70s into the early 80s. And that was a kind of like the extent of it. But there really was never this kind of like universe where we live now, where a project like mine has been sustainable and been publishing for 7 years. And we're literally on the past the weekend of the global box office explosion of Across the Spider-Verse, which is a project that's led by 2 Latino characters, actually 3 Latino characters. One, obviously, the fictional character of Miles Morales, Miguel O'Hara, and Rios Morales. It's a different era right now, but these characters, these artists, they really wanted to connect to our work because we were doing something completely different. We were doing something that was in a positive way, celebrating our culture, celebrating our contributions as part of this U.S. The Latin community makes close to 20% of the United States. And according to the recent USC Annenberg Inclusion Initiative, this study that was produced, if you look at films specifically, out of the 1,300 films that have been produced in the last year alone, only 5% of those roles actually are speaking roles for artists and actors that are Latin. And we're not saying that those are even lead roles. So in a space that, and in a country that we have contributed to, and whether we're Puerto Ricans here in the United States or from Puerto Rico, we've been not only contributing as tax-paying citizens, but we've served in the military. When Puerto Ricans became U.S. citizens, they served in World War I and consistently have served. And my older brother served in the military as well, a decorated sergeant. So we have been part of this country where we continue to support either as entrepreneurs, as storytellers, as artists, as educators, to this kind of like beautiful mosaic that is this nation. And I think in the space of comic book storytelling, obviously in this international genre of storytelling, that a medium of storytelling that exists, we also have contributed a lot. I mean, as far back as, goodness, the 1930s, when Alejandro Schomburg de Chavez, who went by the name of Alex Schomburg, came from Puerto Rico with his two brothers and opened an art studio in the late 1930s in New York City. This was an artist that would be one of the many artists after Jack Kirby to draw Captain America when it was still Timely Comics. We've been part of this industry. We've been part of this culture. We've been part of this medium for decades. And I think what La Borinqueña did for many of the artists that we continue to work with is it was a validation. It was a yes. It was thank you. This is fine. We're finally being recognized as contributors to this culture that we love, this culture that we celebrate. Another artist I also want to acknowledge. I mean, there's so many, but the one that just pops into my mind is Mike Hawthorne. Well, many people may not know is Puerto Rican because his last name is Hawthorne, and he just recently finished a run on Batman with Chip Zdarsky, and it's an incredible opportunity to work with artists like Mike because we actually collaborated on a mural with the Philadelphia organization Mural Arts. And this 3-story mural of La Borinqueña was art directed by myself, but included the work of Mike Hawthorne and Emilio Lopez, both like celebrated mainstream Marvel, DC, Nickelodeon, IDW, goes down the list artists in the comic book industry.
All right. Okay. So I also noticed that you have an issue that includes Rosario Dawson.
Oh yeah,
so
she is right there.
Yeah. So how did that come about? And was she excited to be a part of the narrative there?
That's a good question. So it goes back to 2016 when all of these artists started connecting and reaching out to me. One of these artists was Gustavo Vasquez. I was art directing an idea for a cover, a variant cover that he did, and Gus eventually for the first issue contributed breakdowns that we used for one of our artists that I was mentoring. In these initial conversations that I had with Gus, he literally mentions, "Hey, do you know my niece?" And I was like, where's this coming from? I just met you. Why would I know your niece? He said, well, my niece is Rosario Dawson. And I was like, how could she possibly be your niece? You're younger than me, and she's about your age. Then I said, well, okay, we're both Puerto Rican. That kind of makes sense, So he connects us, and she immediately is connected to our work. And I also had the opportunity of literally kind of like one of these like chance meetings of literally like strangers in the night. But in this case, we were on one of the staging streets for the Puerto Rican Day Parade in 2016 when La Borinqueña was going to make her debut as someone who was cosplaying as her. It so happened that her float and our float, Rosario Dawson's float, was literally on the same staging street that ours was. So we were just literally waiting for our turn so that our floats could just turn that left and go up Fifth Avenue. And we had this kind of like exchange. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're Rosario. And I was like, this is my superhero, La Borinqueña. And then fast forward, Gus Vasquez reconnects us. And then 9 months after that first issue debuts, Hurricane Maria hits Puerto Rico. This devastating Category 5 storm that left 4,645 people dead, left over 200,000 Puerto Ricanos displaced, and who are to this day part of the larger U.S. population because they've been relocated by FEMA or on their own moved to the United States. While I was producing what would be my first crossover with DC Comics, Rosario reached out to me and she said, I want to do whatever I can to be a part of this project, either use my platform to promote it, but I would love to contribute a story. Now, the arrangement that I had with many creators for this project, from Frank Miller to Gail Simone to Greg Pak to Bill Sienkiewicz, was here's the toy box. You have access to any DC character and they got to team up with La Borinqueña. Rosario said, I want to write a story just about La Borinqueña. I don't really want to team her up with anyone. That would become the beginning of our friendship. Many, many years later, we still are connected. She has co-hosted charity events for us. She has co-hosted signings for us at New York Comic Con. Outside of the work that we do with La Borinqueña, she's executive producer on a film that debuts on the 21st of June on PBS called Below the Belt, a documentary film that addresses the disease that afflicts most women, endometriosis, because she herself suffers from endometriosis, so she serves as an executive producer on this film. My wife, Kyung Jun Miranda, who is the director of our charitable efforts, our La Borinqueña Grant Awards, also suffers from endometriosis. So that also connects us to Rosario. But when I was approached by the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, to put a book together to kind of educate readers around renewable energy, they had the idea of asking a celebrity. A lot of the work that NRDC does is really connected to their relationships with various celebrities, either their charitable events or their campaigns, and they'll always attach a celebrity. I literally see Seth Meyers' face when I'm saying this, because I was at an event that he hosted last year that was brilliant. It's one thing to watch him on a late night show, it's another thing to watch him in person. And when they mentioned that to me, I chimed in immediately, and I was like, well, we already have a great relationship with Rosario Dawson, and unlike other celebrities, she already is committed to social justice. She's already committed to climate justice. She uses her platform to produce documentaries to raise awareness. So it was an obvious fit. And we had such a great relationship with her that I knew how she spoke. I knew her voice. I literally always can hear her voice. And I've done that when I work with artists like John Leguizamo, when I edit their books and there's certain scenes that I have to tweak as an editor, I can get into these voices and apply them. So when I wrote the script for La Borinqueña guest starring Rosario Dawson, I knew how she was going to speak. I knew how she would engage with these characters. So it was a natural fit. It was also an affirmation of her love of the character, because soon after she connected with me when we were going to work on this benefit book crossover with DC Comics, she also asked me to help her make or rather at the time she said help her find, but it didn't exist. So I had to help her make a La Borinqueña costume. So for Halloween in 2017, she literally dressed up as La Borinqueña, and there she was with her daughter walking up and down Sunset Boulevard during Halloween as La Borinqueña. So it's a character that she's always connected to as an Afro-Latina herself. It's a character that she's always connected to because of her activism and her commitment to social justice. And through our friendship over these years, it's given us the opportunity to have an ally that really understands what our work is about. And, although she is a dear friend, I always associate and celebrate her as an ally to our work. So we're very fortunate to have the support of Rosario Dawson and also to have her part of our universe. Literally, it kind of reminded me of those, Scooby-Doo cartoons where every week there was a new celebrity that appeared in it. So, there she is.
Okay, so I also saw that the first issue of Vernon King was put in the Smithsonian. I mean, gee, how big is that?
Jiminy crickets, that's gigantic, right? So big that I didn't understand the gravity of it. And my wife Kyung was like, listen, we're doing a road trip. Packing up the car, we're taking the boys, we're going down to DC, and we're going to see this comic book in person. And I was like, but it's just a comic book, and it's just on, and this she was like, look, I don't care how small or big this is to you. This is a moment for our family. And, she was right. She's always right. And there we were at the National Museum of American History. And yeah, it was formally added to the collection, but they also created a small exhibit to kind of like commemorate it. And they were exhibiting it alongside all the other comic books that are part of their collection. And there is La Borinqueña in front of my eyes behind this glass case, next to the Avengers, next to Detective Comics, next to Action Comics, these comics that were from the 30s, 40s, 70s. And I just couldn't control myself. I just started crying because it was just so incredibly unbelievable that a book that I produced was now part of historical record. I had this kind of like flashback to the end of Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, when they had these gigantic, crates, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant ends up. But I literally thought to myself, my book is in there now too. It's right there in that collection, and that opened us up to an ongoing incredible relationship with the Smithsonian, because many people who may not be aware, Smithsonians are the federal museums. Our tax money literally goes into these museums, and I do emphasize museums. Around the Great Mall in Washington, D.C., there are close to 20 different museums, and the National Museum of American History is one of these. museums. So we've been approached by many other museums that are a part of the Smithsonian network. The American Indian Museum, the Asian Pacific American Center, the Latino Museum have all, in one way or another, supported our work through grants, through exhibitions, through advocacy, through promotion. Our books are sold at the Smithsonian Bookstore. Our books are in the Molina Family Institute Gallery in the National Museum of American History. It's just amazing that this project is now part of this institution. I mean, our book was also like right next to Chris Evans' Captain America Shield. I mean, I literally saw a scene out of like Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I kept thinking Anthony Mackie was gonna come by and try to take the shield out of the glass case, you know. So it's incredible to know that something that I created that completely was funded by my own resources is where it is now, and it's not only being collected into this kind of oversized hardcover edition, but it's still part of historical record as well.
That's not, that's amazing. Okay, so like I said, you mentioned you're partnering with Zoop for your campaign, which I believe starts on June 7th. How did you decide to partner with Zoop?
That was all because of my friend Des Taylor. Des Taylor is a London-based artist who has been acquainted with me for many years. He is also like one of my, I have to call him like one of my biggest allies and champions. Every time there's an opportunity, whether he's in Dubai or whether he's here in the States, he always thinks of me and he says, "Oh, I've got to introduce these chaps to my bloke Edgardo," and he always does that. And he connected me to Jordan and Eric at Zoop before they even had this company. They actually used to have a digital comic book platform that was incredibly innovative. Unfortunately, that business didn't sustain itself, but then they did an incredible pivot towards developing Zoop, which is an incredible model for independent creators such as myself, right? Or just creators in general in the comic book industry, because if you're a successful artist like Jorge Molina, as prolific as he is, the reality is he's also a freelance artist. So he's not Jorge Molina Incorporated, and he has this kind of like infrastructure to do fulfillment, distribution, marketing, etc. Zoop set up our interviews. Zoop will, as an independent creator, handle a lot of the overhead for me and the infrastructure. They'll handle distribution. They'll handle order fulfillment. They'll handle warehousing. They'll handle print production. Something that as a small studio myself, I typically handle on my own. So it's a significant relief to see that they're there as allies and as partners. And their commission is a little more than your typical crowdfunding campaign, but I gladly allow it because they support in such a way. These crowdfunding campaigns, I think many of us have seen these horror stories that are made into like kind of like memes or like viral videos where artists are overwhelmed when they realize they've reached all these goals. They're like, oh my gosh, I now have to fulfill these promises. I have to pack all these envelopes. I got to print more t-shirts or print posters. Oh my gosh, I don't have any money left. I spent all my money on actually all these fulfillments and perks that I was offering. And what Zoop does, what Jordan and Eric do, they keep the project grounded. They really keep it realistic. And they also, because they have relationships with a lot of print houses, both here in the United States and internationally, they know how to price a project for a creator so that it has attainable and real goals. And that's something that's incredible. And aside from that, they really believe in our work in the space of philanthropy, and they're actually donating a portion of their commission towards our charitable work, which is incredible that they offered that and that they're actually going to do that. So it's exciting because one of the things that has been incredible about our work with La Borinqueña over these 7 years, we've published various graphic novels, is how well the book has been received by academic institutions across the United States. Well, quite honestly, across the world, because recently French publisher Atier published a textbook with a chapter dedicated to Puerto Rico that features La Borinqueña. So students internationally are learning about La Borinqueña and are reading our graphic novels, but they're graphic novels, which are paperbacks. So with many little hands, after a lot of handling, they fall apart. Most comic book readers are not going to put it in a Mylar sleeve and then put it in a long box. They're not going to do that. They're going to roll it up, smack their classmate across the head, open it up again, read it, or throw it in their backpack with their lunchbox. So the idea of making a hardcover is very viable. It's a hardcover book. It's going to be a part of a library's collection, and it will afford itself to more readers. And by collecting all of our graphic novels, readers have the opportunity of learning this entire arc. I always say that right now is the perfect time to learn about La Borinqueña. I've been writing this series for 7 years. At one point, there was a cliffhanger, and there was 3 years between those two books. Goodness, I can't believe that was like so much time between these two books. But now the book is a complete story arc, and it's close to 300 pages of beautiful, colorful, sequential art, and a complete story that connects readers to a real place, a real people, a real culture. And I'm excited about the opportunity. I have many, many hardcovers in my library. My favorite one is actually the I was about to call it the Criterion edition. I'm thinking DVDs, but it's the deluxe. It was I forget the title, but it was Darwin Cook's New Frontier, and they packaged it in a slipcase, and it's about like 13, 14 inches tall. I wanted to do a slipcase, and this is to tell you how cool and smart Jordan and Eric are at Zoop. They said, we know you want to do a slipcase, but a slipcase is going to cost this much more. And then we're going to have a higher goal or a higher price point for the book. So I acquiesced and I took the slipcase off, but that's always was my dream. I just love the idea. I'm old school. I love having books on a shelf, and the idea of like these collectible books, they're limited edition, and the little, but the tassel, oh my gosh, the little ribbon that serves as a bookmark. But anyway, this is something I'm excited about. It is going to be oversized. A typical comic book is about just under 7 inches by 10 inches. This is going to be 8 by 12 inches. So it's a lot larger than a typical comic book. It's a hardcover book. Beautiful rendered artwork by Angel Jesus Calong, who made his debut in DC last fall. So we're very excited about that. And he donated this artwork, which is incredibly like, wow for us, that so many artists. And, he's joining a long list of artists who have supported our work through their donated artwork. Artists like Bill Sienkiewicz, Tony Daniel, Frank Miller, George Perez, Carlos Pacheco, so many artists, Dennis Cowan, Ken Lashley, who have donated original art because they truly believe in our work, truly feel that their art and their interpretation of our character kind of like, well, amplifies the work that we're doing. And it does. I have like an image in my head of Mike Allred when he created his interpretation of La Borinqueña. I mean, there's so many artists that have interpreted and donated their art. It's incredible as a fan of comics, as a reader of comics, to know that so many of these successful artists in their own right really support and believe our work. It's humbling. It truly is. It really is.
Excellent. Okay, so you briefly mentioned the Borinqueña grant awards that some of your proceeds are going toward. When did that foundation start, and what do those grants do when put in use?
So that program was started by my wife and business partner, Kyung Jun Miranda. When we teamed up with DC Comics, we knew that this was going to be a big book, and it was. It was the #1 bestseller on Amazon.com for 4 months straight. It was a bestseller with incredible support from Diamond comic distributors. They were exceptional in their support, giving us full page ads, taking a cut on their commission for this book, really pushing this in. Obviously, we know about local comic book shops, but Diamond was very, very, very pivotal in getting our books in retailers, brick and mortar retailers like Target, like Barnes and Noble, like Walgreens. And this book was such a commercial success that Kyung had the vision to recognize that we should use this money that we raised as a fund to create a micro grant program. Typically, what many people do in time of crisis is they come together immediately, they raise money, and because of the infrastructure of these corporate nonprofits, they are the most visible ones. Their marketing and advertising campaigns are immediately in your face. They're immediately in front of you, and you click or you call and you cut a check, and there. her vision, Kyung's vision for this was, we don't know we'll have another opportunity like this. There are so many local grassroots organizations that are immediately connected to people who were affected by this natural disaster. Let's do our part. Let's research. Let's vet these organizations. Let's invite them to apply for our grant. But also, let's have this kind of like demystify, decolonize approach to philanthropy, meaning that we're not going to create stipulations. You need to do this, this to get this money. It was more like, what do you want to do? What are you already doing? What can we do to amplify what you're already doing? And when you work with these local grassroots organizations and you give them a $5,000 or $10,000 grant, they really know how to make that work. They really know how to make that stretch. Organizations like El Departamento de la Comida, the Department of Food, organizations like Correlations, the Boys and Girls Clubs of Puerto Rico, of Corredor Afro, all of these institutions were grassroots organizations. The Department of Food, which is actually a sustainable farming program, an educational program, used the funds that we gave them to buy tools, to loan to farmers, to create a seed exchange program, to actually create their own micro grant program. And they actually awarded smaller grants to farmers. This type of transformative work was something that inspired us because we started recognizing early on that there lies the true heroism. These local grassroots organizations who shared with me, many of them were very grateful that we awarded them these grants, because they say that, these larger corporate nonprofits, they get all the funding and they don't have the bandwidth, these small organizations, to compete with these larger institutions. And we seek out these organizations and we award them grants. And we're fully transparent. If you go to our website, la-borinquena.com, you will not only see the list of organizations that we have supported over these many years, but you have contact information. And I encourage many people to visit our website to learn about these organizations. Because of this work that we've done, we've used our platform, whether we're doing interviews or whether we're doing collaborations, to amplify the work that they're doing, to connect other organizations to each other. So not only do we award these micro grants to these local grassroots organizations, but we provide forums where these organizations can learn of each other's work and also form their own collaborations that go beyond what we're able to fund. And I think that's one of the things that sets us apart. Philanthropy, charity work is not an afterthought for us. It's part of the book. It's part of the story. It's part of the printing. It goes into that mixture of CMYK that prints our comic books.
Very good. Okay, so my second to last question for you. I told you when we started, before we started here, that I had a hypothetical question for you. Some people can jump right in. Some people have to think about it. But you've accomplished so much in the way of promoting and emphasizing cultural history and narratives of Puerto Rico. If you had to pick maybe one or two of your top three, or maybe two or three of your top accomplishments that nurture that goal, what would they be?
I think the grants program. That honestly is something that I'm incredibly inspired by every day. When we have the opportunity to create these collaborations that can bring these resources in, it always happens because there's someone on the other side of that collaborations that inherently sees the value in our work. In the case of DC Comics, that was Dan DiDio. He was our champion. He really did believe in what we were doing. Why? Because Dan DiDio had a personal connection to Puerto Rico because of his wife, Leilani. He frequently visited Puerto Rico. He frequently did signings at local comic shops in Puerto Rico. He valued and loved Puerto Rico. And when this cataclysmic event affected Puerto Rico, he was literally online at the New York Comic Con at my table, waiting 45 minutes to talk to me. And he had on his World League Baseball cap of the Puerto Rico team. And he came to me, and out of that conversation, it was kind of that let them say no moment for me. And I said, let's have a team up. I think La Borinqueña should team up with the entire DC universe, and let me bring them to Puerto Rico and these stories, not only to have a book that serves as a fundraising vehicle, but that also serves in the space of storytelling as an opportunity to educate and to share. Because in the collective canon of these characters over close to a century, never once had their stories brought them to Puerto Rico. And this was an amazing opportunity. And I think that's really what I'm the most connected to and most inspired by. And I'm very grateful to my wife and partner, Kyung Miranda, for having the vision to create this program, to continue to lead this program, to come up with innovative ideas to have this program remain sustainable. The fact that over the course of these many years that we've been publishing La Borinqueña, these 7 years, we've raised and donated $200,000 in micro grants. That's something that has to really be emphasized. We come from a place of philanthropy that wasn't advised by a PR firm who was telling us, this public image you guys got, you look too rich, a little too greedy. We need to soften it up. It's quite the opposite. We're not rich. We're working middle class artists who work out of our small apartment and studio space here in Brooklyn, who truly believe that to really make transformative change, we have to invest in charity. And I'm old school. I grew up watching PBS, and I love the PBS model of donate now and get this tote bag, get this mug, get this hat, and I was like, that's such a great model, because to just simply say, jiggle your cup and say put some money in this, but if you actually have something tangible, think about how that works. I just bought this La Borinqueña hat. I just bought this La Borinqueña comic book. If I'm reading this, if this is on my coffee table, if I'm at a coffee shop and somebody asks me about that book, I can tell them about the characters, but I can also say, yeah, and I purchased this book, and this is actually supporting charity work in Puerto Rico. That's something that nobody can really say about their publications. And a lot of it is a testament of these collaborations like those with DC Comics, with NRDC, with Rosario Dawson. Rosario Dawson, she gave us permission to use her likeness for free. DC Comics gave us permission to use their entire toy box, just like Neil Adams says, you get to play with them, but you got to put them back where you found them. They let us use them. And we had access to their entire catalog of characters. I mean, that's unheard of. All of their exclusive artists, as long as they were available to work with us, worked with us. And at the time, Frank Miller was an exclusive artist at DC, and he was like, I want to work with these guys. I want to create my own interpretation of La Borinqueña. And that, to me, is something that inspires me, and I hope will also open up other opportunities. Even this crowdfunding campaign, honestly, this collaboration with Zoop is connected to our charity work, because they see the value in our charity work, and on their own, both Jordan and Eric at Zoop were like, we're going to donate to your work. So everyone who contributes to this crowdfunding campaign, when you pledge or pre-order our book, you're supporting our charitable work. Jordan and Eric, both of them came up with this great idea, the buy one, donate one. If you choose to buy 2 books, one will come to you and one will be put inside of a collection that will eventually find itself in the hands of a public library in Puerto Rico. That's incredible. And that was their idea as well. And it's something that I'm excited about. I really hope that we have a successful campaign so that more people can read our stories, learn about Puerto Rico, learn about this superhero universe that we develop, but more importantly, help share this work and help continue our philanthropic work.
Excellent. Okay, so before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to, because we've talked about your Zoop campaign. If you have any other projects that you want to discuss or can discuss, I want to give you that opportunity.
Well, another one of our collaborations that we're really excited about is with Boss Fight Studio. Boss Fight Studio is a toy company that's been around for some years now. They've worked with properties like everything from Flash Gordon to Popeyes to Umbrella Academy. And we have an action figure line that's coming out this fall that we're incredibly excited about. And similar to our campaign with Zoop, they're also donating a portion of the proceeds to our continued charity work. But these are highly functional, highly articulate action figures that are coming out. So I'm a huge toy collector, so I'm just super excited to have these characters on my shelf as well. And then we just recently launched a new spin-off series out of our La Borinqueña universe, which is Oro, El Coqui Dorado. It's a new superhero that we're super excited about. He has his own series. One of the ideas that we have is that in between each one of our La Borinqueña graphic novels, we're going to drop single issues for our spin-off characters. And Oro is the first superhero that we spun off. And this comic book is not going to be collected in the hardcover edition, but it's available now off of our website. And the artist that actually did the cover, Christian Muñiz Torres, is a young artist who just graduated from Parsons, and this is his first published work. Part of the model that we've created with our studio is to not only connect readers to our culture and heritage in Puerto Rico and support our philanthropic work, but to also support and give opportunities to young artists. And Christian is one of these such artists that we support and believe in.
Fantastic. Well, I got to tell you, this has been great, and we're going to wish you the very best in your Zoop campaign. Let me ask you a quick question: Are you going to have a signed edition available on Zoop?
I think we are. I think we might actually sign all of them. I think I might actually sign all of them. Yeah, because I think that's. I don't put value on my signature. If somebody wants me to sign it, then I'm more than happy to give that away.
Well, I'm there because I'm all about the signed edition. So, awesome. So that works for me. All right. Well, I appreciate it, and like I said, we'll be following your campaign very closely, and hopefully, we're going to get to talk to you again in the future.
Look forward to it. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for having me on your show.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this edition of GVN Talking Comics Interview. GVN Talking Comics is a production of Geek Vibes Nation.